Hello everyone, welcome back to the Landedkiller show. It's been about a few days since the forums themselves closed, and I can't help but feel a sense of emptiness as to something I used to always do, or sort of be to go on those forums. It just feels so weird to know that they're gone and that they're not ever coming back. It just feels like we're in a different chapter of World of Warships right now. I feel like we're in one of the latter phases where things are going to kind of go on a steady decline for a while. I just feel like the developers really just didn't think this one through hard enough when it came to shutting down those forums, considering that World of Warplanes forum is still up and that game barely gets any players at the moment. Sorry, cuz, but that's the truth of it. The World of Warplanes, they ain't as hot as ships. Ships is hotter than planes, yet ships gets its forum shut down for some unknown reason. Just doesn't sit right with me what they did with that. But anyway, shifting topics onto the future of WoWs and how I kind of see things playing out. I think the game probably has a good 4 to 5 years left if things are managed properly and not run into the ground. It just looks like our developers are over monetization again with the game. But they've gotten a little better, like with this Jaeger event kind of a deal, if you get my drift. One of the biggest things that I'm just noticing from a lot of players is just kind of not so much coordination as we used to have in the older days of World Warships. It seems like some of the older players aren't around like they used to be anymore. Feels like old Landedkillers drift around in a little ocean with all the new people, and all the older people are all gone now for some reason or another. But I can tell you that mainly what's driving people off is just kind of the lack of transparency from wargaming, and just the fact that the forums, the place where a lot of the older players would actually talk, is gone. I've tried Discord, I've tried Reddit, it's just not the same. It's like soulless in a way. That's how it feels to me with the forums being gone. It feels like we lost a part of the game's soul. Of getting too deep into the concept of what a soul is. I think that the game is going to have to really fight an uphill battle when a new competitor comes out. I think that the main competition is going to come from some unknown third party that hasn't yet made their presence known yet. But I believe in time that there will be competition for this game, and it's going to put significant pressure on developers to change things for the better. A lot of the ships that I see coming out, as like the Lucian, it's just a copy and paste a new sashimi with a new paint job and change statistics. Doesn't really interest me as much as something like Annapolis does. And this is simply just taking things up a notch by adding on another turret. Honestly, it makes me wonder where the future of the game goes. Obviously, we know we're getting support carriers and probably IA-401 sometime within the next 2 years. I just think that they're going to focus more on these hybrid lines for the future, if the premium ships are anything to go by. I expect that there'll probably be some sort of a cruiser hybrid line for the Japanese eventually, because that was actually something the Japanese were actually working towards when they had the last hull of their cruiser. I think it was Ibuki class. The Ibuki class is what they're working towards. They're trying to change that into some sort of hybrid carrier cruiser thing. I think cruisers and hybrids will be an interesting concept to explore further. I do like pulling out tone. I will admit, Wargaming did kind of sucker me into getting Hell for it a bit, just because I'm curious about how a destroyer with planes would play out. I must say that Halford is pretty decent once you get the hang of it. I think the problem that most people run into in playing Halford is just knowing when to just lean back a little bit. Because you got like at least you got smoke. You got to use that smoke to get into a good position so that you're not farmed into oblivion. If you get my drift. Obviously, I don't think that we're done with the super ships. I think that once these are established, we're going to have another round of them again, except at tier 12. If we call this tier 11, then the tier 12s are eventually going to be a thing, I think, and that's how they're going to ease us into the modern ships. The tiers 11, 12, and 13 will be the bridge between older and modern ships, is what I'm thinking they're going to do. Obviously, we don't have any confirmation of that. That's just pure speculation on my part. But I think that, given past precedent, we're going to get a special mode again like we did with the supers, except there's going to be something different about these tier 12s that just wouldn't make sense in the normal gameplay. Some new kind of gimmick besides special firing modes for the tier 12s, whatever those gimmicks might be. I think that the gimmick might be some form of an enhanced speed boosting mechanic or enhanced accuracy mechanic like we're seeing from the new Japanese BC line. Oh my gosh. Too many damn torpedoes in that game these days. I still can't believe they're going to bring Kitakami back into the game when I already have problems with the current submarine situation. I mean, it's not as bad as it was before, but you still do see a good amount of subs, and once they release a line that's easy to play, i.e. probably the Russian submarines, which are going to be the next thing, I believe, it's going to be getting out of hand. I actually thought it was supposed to be Russian submarines before Japanese battlecruisers. Maybe they pushed the release out more. I seem to remember in the waterline that they were going to release the Russian submarines as the next line before the Japanese. Maybe they changed their release calendar because of the war right now in Russia. I don't imagine that it's going to be very popular to release lines around Russians for a long time, considering what's going on overseas. Granted, do people think that this is going to come over and involve more countries? I think it will. I think this war will be one that eventually it's going to lead to us being involved more directly besides beyond military aid. I believe the thing is that there's no peace talks, and that's the main holdover, is that there's no peace talks with this war. Because every time that peace is tried to happen, there's been efforts by both Mr. Zelensky and by our own government to not allow the peace deals to go forward. I believe that in order to fix a lot of the problems, we need to de-escalate the situation over in Ukraine. And this war's got to find its endpoint. It's got to be divided along the 38th parallel, perhaps like Korea was, and it needs to come to a close before this winds into a World War III scenario, which nobody wants. Honestly, nobody wants a World War III. It's just out of the question for many, because a World War III would mean that a lot of young folks would be drafted, and probably including myself. You think about it, because they can't meet the recruitment goals right now, so they're going to pull from somewhere, and they're likely going to pull from the ages it's not just going to be 18-year-olds getting drafted, is what I'm saying. It's going to be those that are older also getting drafted, most likely. And I think that to be naive and to say that, oh, there won't be no draft is to be silly. I think that a draft could easily happen. And that is why it is important to push for peace before more people end up in the grave because of this conflict. On my main channel, NDVM IRL, I've been very vocal with being anti-war, and I've posted a few anti-war shorts on occasion. I think that my main gripe is the fact that we're involving ourselves in a conflict that doesn't seem to have a conclusion because the country's leader wants to keep fighting to regain all their land, and that's an unrealistic goal when they're losing on the battlefield already. I think that in order to truly see what's going on over there, you need to take a look at the battlefield losses and to actually see what's happening. Don't get me wrong, I want to see Ukraine pull through this and end up on top, but eventually there's got to come a point where peace is pushed for and where this war comes to its close before the whole world is involved in a World War III scenario. Because, let's face it, most people these days don't even think beyond 5 seconds of their actions because they're addicted to these TikToks and shorts. That's not a good thing to be addicted to be honest. When you are focused on trying to get clout and all that, then you lose sight of what truly is important, which is your relationships and the people around you, and just focusing on life itself. I mean, I've been doing this YouTube thing for probably 3 years now, and I know I'm not ever going to be on the level of Mr. Beast, but I do it because I enjoy it. It's like a hobby for me now. Obviously, I would like to make something from it one of these days, but that's going to depend on how relatable I am to all you guys, you know? I'm just trying to be honest with what I'm feeling right now, and I feel that it's not our place to be in this war with Ukraine any longer. I feel like the U.S. should take a role in negotiating peace before we have World War III, and before all of us are drafted in our age group of 25 to 35, 25 to 30. I believe that they would probably cut it off at around 30, but I do believe that that is a possibility if this conflict isn't de-escalated. And we can point the finger at all we want at Russia or at Ukraine. It does not matter in the grand scheme of things if things are not settled. People are dying every day for this war. And who's really gaining from it? Nobody. Nobody's really gaining from this war but those that want to take the resources of Ukraine. And it's a joke to see that we continue to give them money and they lose and lose and lose. Eventually, we're going to be dragged into this with boots on the ground. We already have advisors over there. And if that doesn't give you a parallel to how Vietnam started, that's basically how it started, was boots on the ground with Green Berets. And Kennedy didn't want our troops to be there in the first place. John F. Kennedy, the original, our president, our former president, 1960s. He did not want us to be involved in that, and the warmongers in his cabinet pushed for that war. And we have the same thing happening now. Only most of us are distracted by everything else going on in the news to not pay attention to what's going on. Say what you will about politics, but there eventually has to come a point where we have to wake up and realize that we're not in a good spot right now when it comes to our relationships on the international stage. we're losing the American dollar. There's BRICS forming. It's an alliance of South American nations and China. I think even Russia's getting in on that, where the reserve currency is not the US dollar. Our credit rating just got downgraded by Fitch from AAA to AA+, which is going to cause some long-term effects, no doubt. And our economy, although remaining stable for now, could really be in trouble given a few months from now. I'm not saying all this to frighten you. I'm just saying all this to say, hey, you've gotta look at what's going on around you, and you can't be distracted by all the YouTube T channels and all the other things in life. There's a point where we've got to step up and say, hey, this isn't our war anymore. We've got to say no. Because we've sent tons of money over to Ukraine and they keep losing. And when money stops working, it's going to be boots on the ground. Do not be under any illusion that they won't resort to that. It's not in anybody's best interest to see this war continue, but the ones that are higher up on our government. They feel that they need to prove a point by depleting Russia of its military, by making Russia look stupid. And they're basically using Ukraine as cannon fodder to get their way with weakening Russia, and it's getting out of hand. The only way that things don't escalate is that peace is pushed for. I remember when there was actual effort on trying to end the Syrian civil war some years ago. Well, this war is much higher importance than the Syrian war, and that's why we need to find a way to make peace. And I think the problem with our current society is that we want to always be right, and that in turn causes problems. You can't always be right. There's going to be times when you're wrong, and you have to own up to that. And that's the problem with our society these days, is that we're so focused on what can I do for my pleasure? What can I do for me? And we're not focused on the others around us that may need our help. And that is the problem with our current world, as it were. That people are too focused on me, and not about what we can do to help those in need. And that is why it is important to say when something is wrong. And this war in Ukraine feels wrong. It doesn't feel like we should be there. It feels that we should be the furthest away from it. But mark my words, if they keep losing, we're going to be pulled into it, and it's going to affect an entire generation that's grown up with all this social media and all these things. It's going to affect our entire generation if this war continues to go on, and then they do a draft. I believe that they've already called up reserves. And if those reserves become depleted, or military strength dwindles by a certain amount, they're going to probably call for another draft. And it's up to us everyday people, to start speaking up and start being vocal to push for peace. Because if we don't, it's going to end up with a lot of us being drawn into this war. A war that nobody asked for. And in order to truly understand this conflict from its beginning, you have to understand that the whole reason why we're even involved is because Russia invaded. Not once, but twice. I'm not saying that the right solution to problems is to simply ignore that things are happening. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there needs to be some resolution. We're already almost 2 years into this war, and Has anything changed? Has anything really changed in the battlefield? Has Russia won? Has Ukraine won? No, not really. Just people dying and more territory lost, more territory gained, more escalation. When does it end? When does this cycle of constant war ever end? It seems that throughout our history as a people, we are always prone to getting drawn into conflicts. There has to be a point where we say enough is enough and we start speaking up as Americans like we once did. We did at one point speak up, and we all forget that it was during the 60s. There was a massive anti-war movement, and we need to get that back again. We need to turn to our fellow neighbors and we need to start thinking, hey, if this war isn't stopped, it's going to be our boots on the ground, our troops on the ground. I'm not saying that Ukraine should roll over and give Russia everything, or that Russia should roll over and give Ukraine everything, but I'm saying that peace must be attempted and that peace must be allowed to prevail. Because without peace, we're going to be stuck in an endless conflict for a good 10 years. Because there's going to be a lot of conflict, a lot of back and forth, a lot of finger pointing. And it's not going to be a simple fix. This war is going to go on for quite a while if we're involved in it, which we already are. But the point I'm saying is that we're going to be stuck having to put American lives on the line. And Ukraine is not entirely civil. They have corruption. And it's in the higher levels. And it's very real. The corruption in their government. Just like we have corruption in ours. We need to push for peace, because if we don't, we're going to be stuck. And we're going to lose greatly. Because it's not just going to be us facing Russia. China's going to get in on this too. Don't be silly. The reason why major powers fall is because they lose their standard of morality and they lose their center of ground. They become ungrounded where everything is permitted and everything is allowed. And that is exactly what is happening now. With the way things are, it's exactly what's happening, and it's getting ridiculous. Our nation needs to be strong in pushing for peace, regardless of your background. It's going to be a lot of loss if we're dragged into this war, and we will not gain anything out of it. We will only lose, and there'll be nothing to be gained. Our biggest mistake was overthrowing the government in Ukraine. Do not think for a second that there wasn't influence from outside parties with that. That man that was in power before, he kept the peace. He may have been corrupt himself, but he kept the peace. As soon as they changed to Zelensky, the posture changed and they became more and more pro-war. And this whole constant war ideal has been going on since World War II, where we have to feel like we're the good guys and we have to get ourselves involved. That may have been true during World War II, but our involvement in these conflicts certainly hasn't produced any good. We may have saved some people from tyranny, but at some point we have to ask ourselves, is it worth the cost? Is it worth the cost to keep going into war after war after war, where young men and women come home traumatized and damaged from the conflict itself, and they're not getting the care that they need because so much of our attention is focused on giving foreign countries all of our money. So much of our attention is focused on countless war. It's just ridiculous when you think about it. I don't think anybody likes to see the world as it is now. They want a return to something normal again. We're not always fighting each other over the simplest of things. We need to find our soul again as a nation. And we need to unite and find a way to end this conflict in Ukraine. Because it is not going to end well for anyone if it continues. It's like, come on now. Do we not know our own history? It sure seems like it with all these people blindly wanting war. We will gain nothing. If anything, it's going to just escalate until there's a peace treaty. And it's crazy to me that most people are just going along with this narrative that Ukraine is winning when they're not. They're losing. We're getting laughed at the world stage. Because Ukraine wants to be fierce and independent, wants to say we gotta continue until we get everything back. And we've got to take a look at the numbers, folks, the numbers of people that are perishing. We have to ask ourselves, when is there going to ever be an end to this? Do we really want our sons and daughters to be fighting in Ukraine, to be losing their lives for a country that doesn't give two shits about America? All Ukraine's really being used for is to launder money, if we're really being honest. I don't see the benefit to this war continuing. I really don't. I just see more lives lost. And I see that we do not even have a push for peace anymore, when that used to be one of our core values as Americans. During the 1960s, our push was for there not to be any more continued war in Vietnam. It took many, many years of protests to finally pull us out of that war. And a whole generation of people was blamed. The soldiers came back and they were spit on. They weren't even treated with respect. But it wasn't their fault for being there. It was the government's fault. Government, I'm sorry, but they don't always have your best interests at heart. You always got to be on your toes and be careful. I'm just saying that we're not really having the best of things playing out right now, and that there should be peace in Ukraine, and that it needs to be pushed for, and we can't take no for an answer anymore. Because if we continue to let these things escalate, it's going to involve nuclear weapons. Do not fool yourself for a minute that Russia won't use those. If they're desperate enough, they will use them. And right now, we're not even feeling it, but there was an event in history called the Cuban Missile Crisis, where literally Russia and the US were going to be face to face, and Russia wanted to deploy ICBMs in Havana, in Cuba. And eventually we were able to ease that situation. If we're not seeing the similarities between us getting more involved in Ukraine and a Cuban Missile Crisis situation, then we all gotta wake up. All can't continue going about it thinking that this isn't going to come to our shores and that this isn't going to involve us. Y'all got to wake up and smell the coffee. This war will come to our shores if we don't push for peace now. That's just kind of where I'm at with that, but I hope that people can understand where I'm coming from, that I don't want to be drafted for a war. Nobody wants to be drafted for that crap. But it's going to come down to it if things continue escalating, and it's unfortunate. So my biggest piece of advice to my generation, my age group, you gotta stop thinking that this war's a good thing. It's not, and you gotta start joining together with me and pushing for peace. Because things are gonna continue to escalate until we do. We've gotta get out there and we've gotta say no to the division. We gotta push for unity again. We've gotta unite and we've gotta stop this war. We've gotta push for peace before all of us are drafted and are on the front lines. It is a possibility. It's not a certainty, but it's a possibility. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you on the next video. Hopefully the next video won't be so serious. Thank you.